Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome to the Tech Hot Takes, the show where we take a look at everything that's happened in the world of tech over the past week and see how the people of the internet reacted to them. And yes, the comment section is always such a lovely place to be, right? And this week, we have some actual news. Apple finally announced the new iPhone SE, which is now called the 16e, and that marked the end of a lot of things like the home button, the lightning port, and even Apple's support of Sub-Saharan Africans with AIDS. This week, we also finally saw the demise of the Humane AI Pin, which was quite possibly one of the very worst things to ever have been made. And finally, Canon announced the replacement to TikTok's favorite perpetually sold out camera, the G7X, with the PowerShot V1. And when I say replacement, well, let's just say that they didn't quite hit the mark. If you enjoy these videos and want to see more, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and feel free to comment below about any of the stories, especially if you have a particularly spicy take. I look forward to reading them all. And now onto our first story, and good riddance. The Humane AI Pin is finally dead. Yep, HP of all companies have bought the fledgling company, and they are promising to put every owner out of their misery by turning every single one of the devices into a brick. So what happened here? So the Humane AI Pin was an AI wearable device designed by two ex-Apple employees, and instead of putting it on your wrist or your face, this wearable was a pin that you attached to your lapel, and it was supposed to somehow replace a smartphone. So instead of having a display, you were supposed to talk to it or even use the laser projector that projected onto your hand. It sounded quite cool, but there were just a few problems with it. Firstly, it cost $699 US, which is a massive amount for a device like that. And not only that, but it also needed cellular that was $24 a month. The battery life was also truly woeful, so you needed to use the battery extender literally all of the time. But wait, you can't actually use that because there was a recall of that because it was a massive fire hazard. In addition to that, the projector was too dim to work outside, and most of all, it just simply did not work. There was actually a period of time where there were more returns for the device than actual sales. My personal thought is that maybe if it was positioned as a phone accessory rather than a phone replacement, maybe some people could have waited out the kinks. But no, it was simply supposed to replace a smartphone, and it made no attempt to sync with one. And the thing is, nobody is going to replace a smartphone with something that simply doesn't work. MKBHD famously called it one of the worst devices that he had ever used, to which Osaka Boy comments, MKBHD claims another victim. Just joking, the product was always doomed to failure, and he wasn't the only reviewer with negative views on it. Quite baffling though, it was HP who decided to buy the company, who are famous for massive acquisition blunders like Palm and Autonomy. Horrendous says, how the hell did they convince HP that their junk was worth $116 million? Well, apparently they want Humane's Cosmos operating system and AI on their printers. Ah yes, where have I heard that before? Unfortunately, for the few owners of the Humane AI Pin that remain, there will be no refunds if you purchase your device more than 90 days ago, but at the very least, one function that will remain after the servers go down is the battery life meter. Yep, so you can now check how much battery your paperweight has left. That's just brilliant. Now let's talk about the death of the iPhone SE3. I mean, it's about time, because after 11 years, the iPhone 6's design is seriously dated. I think that we simply underestimate how crazy this is, because 11 years prior to the iPhone 6, phones looked like this. So to be making what is essentially the same design in 2025, it's literally cooked. So this week, the iPhone 16e, the replacement to the SE3, was announced, and the internet had some thoughts. While this is the phone that most people had been expecting, it takes the internals of the iPhone 16 so that it can be compatible with Apple Intelligence, and it basically strips it down to the bare essentials. So essentially there's no camera control button, there's only one rear camera and stuff like that. The problem is, however, is that it's far more expensive than what people had wanted. Nesta says 599 US dollars. No thank you. And Athmosk says hard pass. I mean, while it is relatively expensive, it still comes with a blazing fast processor. It does have an OLED display and was also promised to be incredible battery life. There is one thing though that they missed out on that I believe sort of ruins the device, and that is the lack of MagSafe. Yet for some reason they couldn't afford the $5 or so just to put some magnets in the back, so this is a phone that only charges wirelessly on flat surfaces. So it's kind of objectively worse than the 2009 Palm Pre in a way. But that's not the only controversial thing about the iPhone 16e. Have a listen to this comment. Segfaults.org says, a sad reminder of Apple giving into EU tyranny. And I absolutely agree. So the passing of the iPhone SE3 means that there are no more Apple devices that you can buy with a Lightning port. Yep, due to the EU, the beautiful, simple, elegant Lightning port, and of course the somewhat less popular cables, are now finally dead. So let's see how the internet reacted to it. Eric says, goodbye, sweet prince. I always liked the Lightning plug design a little better. It's sexier. All the best though. In a superior parallel universe, Apple sold the design for Lightning to the USB consortium for $1, and that became USB-C. I agree with this take. The Lightning port was a more elegant port than USB-C, and while it did support USB 3 speeds, it was unfortunately only ever seen on the iPad Pro models. It would have been great to see what it could have become had it been developed a little bit further, if not for the EU's meddling. Avenged 110 says, for things that didn't require high power or fast data transfer speeds, I've always preferred Lightning. It's a much more durable connector. And agreed there too. I've never seen anyone complain about a broken Lightning port, whereas with USB-C, the ports get wobbly quickly and the tongue is rather delicate. Thing is, we can't say the same about the cables though, because Lightning cables were not the best made thing in the world. And finally, Azentropy says, I still believe the Lightning connector idea was superior. When it broke, it was the cable/connector that broke. With USB-C, I've now had 4 devices break with the on-device receptacle. That never happened in the dozens of Lightning devices I had. It was the protocols and bandwidth that couldn't keep up. So while the advantages of having one cable design for everything, you know, it's pretty obvious, and that's what the EU mandate was all about enforcing, we can see from the public outcry that the Lightning port will still be missed by many. And the thing is, with the EU's restrictions, I can't wait to be using USB-C for the next 50 years. Yay. And for our next story, we are going to be talking about the iPhone 16e again, but this one seems to be the most controversial yet, because it seems like that Apple no longer cares about people with AIDS. Not only that, but they specifically don't care about people with AIDS in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yep, you heard right. Despite supporting the cause for 18 long years, with the discontinuation of the iPhone SE3, there is no longer an Apple device that you can currently buy that is part of Product Red, which was Apple's collaboration with the charity Red that originally sought to end the AIDS pandemic in parts of Africa. And let's just say that the internet is not exactly pleased with it. Belgian Chocolate says, now the money goes to another kind of charity. Apple's pockets. How very true that seems to be. Compot, however, is seeing this a little bit more optimistically. Apple doesn't hate AIDS as much as it loves greed. Yeah, perhaps not then. Aeronaut says, absolutely disgusting. The richest company in the world stopped supporting a really important charity that saves lives in some of the poorest countries in the world. Tim Cook should be ashamed of himself. And Atomwork says, just buy a red cover. And while that is quite a practical solution, I feel like that you might be missing the point slightly, I'm afraid, although the red color was very pretty. So what I want to ask is, do you think that Apple is right to end their support to Sub-Saharan Africans dying of AIDS? Let me know in the comments. And before we get to the final story, I would like to say that this video is sponsored by the Arc Pulse case that's available for iPhone, Galaxy, and Pixel. If you are like me and just hate phone cases because of how ugly and bulky they generally are, but you aren't quite brave enough to skip protection altogether, then the Arc Pulse is simply the only acceptable option in my eyes. Every single Arc Pulse is created from solid aluminium or titanium, and it comes in 2 pieces and it slips onto the top and bottom of your phone with friction alone. There are no nasty adhesives here. Over the past 2 years, I can't describe how many times I've dropped my phone, and I'm glad to say that the case has protected it each time. And that's because 99% of the time, it's only the corners that need protection. And this is what the Arc Pulse is best at, protecting your corners. So if you want to protect your phone and actually feel the lovely nakedness of it at the same time, you can save 10% using my code Davis10 through the link in the description below. And finally, for our final story, one of the things that shocked me most over the past year is the unfathomable resurgence of the Canon G7X. I mean, while it was a fairly decent enthusiast compact camera back in the day, it simply paled in comparison to the more expensive Sony RX100 competitor. It was a camera that sort of existed but didn't really resonate with a lot of consumers. But how things have changed. Whereas the G7X was around $600 new back in the day, people on TikTok especially are now scrambling to buy it on eBay for upwards of $1,500 US. That is simply bonkers. Remember, this is a very dated camera with a pretty average size 1-inch sensor with a fairly soft and unremarkable zoom lens. I've owned 2 of them, and I have to say that while they were pretty good for video back in the day, the photos, they always disappointed me. Maybe the hype for the camera is simply because there aren't any new compact cameras around, as the last PowerShot to be released prior to this was in 2019 with the Mark III G7X. But luckily, the rumor mill has been suggesting for the past few months that a modern replacement was finally on the way. But oh dear, because they came out with the PowerShot V1, which it's got impressive specs in some cases, but it's not exactly the camera that I feel that anyone was waiting for. While it's got a massive micro four thirds sensor, for instance, which is, you know, really big for a compact, it does have a very odd lens, a 16 to 50 millimeter equivalent f2.8 to 4.5 zoom lens, which feels very slow to me. And when you've got a zoom lens like that attached to a fairly large sensor, it means that the camera is actually quite chunky for a compact. The problem is that, like with the Sony ZV-1 that effectively replaced the RX100 line, the V1 is a camera that's not really made for photographers, rather it was made for vloggers. Imager of says, on paper, the perfect vlogging camera. Well done, Canon. I think you meant vlogging, but I literally remember when my autocorrect used to correct vlogging to vlogging, so a very relatable comment. 3% says, just another product designed for video shooters, not photographers. Clearly, that is where manufacturers think that all the gold is buried. My nap was good. Well, I'm glad to hear that you had a good rest, but yeah, I feel like that the only photocentric compacts that we have remaining are the Ricoh GRs and maybe the Leica Deluxe 8. But you know, to be fair, that isn't a very good camera. And L. Lensons asks, why is there a furry caterpillar on the top? Well, that furry caterpillar is called a dead cat. Well, I guess a bigger, proper one would be. But since this is just a little thing that covers the mic holes, dead caterpillar might be a better term. I mean, if you are a vlogger, then this does seem to be the camera for you. But I do hope that Canon repackages this camera for photographers with a proper EVF, a built-in flash, and a faster lens. And that brings us to the end of the video. So if you enjoyed it and want to see more from my channel, be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And until next time, I hope that you are having an amazing day, and toodaloo.